1460 WVOX.
Now back to the Greenberg Report on 1460 WVOX. Once again, here's Greenberg Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
Hi, I'm Paul Feiner, the Greenberg Town Supervisor, and we have a very interesting discussion with Lulu Friesdat. It's a little depressing, or a lot depressing, because we're really concerned about election security. And Danielle is a new voter, and you have a question?
Yeah, so you were talking about the potential to install malware remotely. Would you say that with this installation, it's feasible that people may not even know that there's a problem with the voting itself?
You would not know. The software is tens of thousands of lines of code. The malware might be one or two lines that just gets slipped in there. It would be very, very hard to find through something like forensic analysis. And as I said, we're not doing forensic analysis. So really the only way to know if the machines are counting correctly is to do a hand count audit of them, of the ballots. And that is why security experts recommend that we vote on paper ballots using hand marks. So you mark your paper ballot with a pen or a pencil so that we know that's the voter's intent, not a machine marking your ballot for you, because, again, the machine could be hacked to mark your ballot in a different way than what you want. So you mark the ballot yourself on paper, then you scan it into a machine that does nothing but just scan that ballot. It doesn't print on that ballot. It doesn't do anything else. It just scans your ballot. And then we get that machine count, because we do like to have our counts quickly at the end of the night. Everybody wants those results. But then the next day or in the following weeks, we do a careful public audit by hand of either all of the paper ballots or a statistically significant number of those paper ballots. It's called a risk-limiting audit. And that way we can have confidence that the machine has not been hacked. That's really what security experts are recommending in terms of finding out, as you want to know. You're asking, would you know? If the way to know is to do an audit. But what that brings me to is the current problem that we have here in New York. And this is a really, really critical, urgent problem that I want people to just wake up and pay attention to, because if we don't pay attention to this now, it will be too late, months from now. Currently, the New York State Board of Election Commissioners are about to certify a voting system called the Express Vote XL. And this system could make it impossible for us to audit the ballots with confidence. And the reason why is because the machine has the ability to add votes to the paper ballot. And since I can tell that you're understanding now how we really need to count those ballots by hand in order to check if the machine is counted accurately, I know you would understand that if the paper ballot gets compromised, if the machine has the ability to mark extra votes on it, that would be a disaster in terms of our election security.
So if there was a statistically significant, margin that needed to be recounted with this bill, there would be really no way to assure that the votes hadn't been changed from what they authentically were.
With this voting machine. So here's what's happening right now. Up to this time, since about 2010, New York has been using optical scan and digital scan voting machines. And basically what those do is they just scan your ballot. This is the system that we have now, which is pretty good. We have a paper ballot that we mark by hand for the most part, except for voters with disabilities, and we put those ballots through a scanner. But the voting companies have developed these new machines. So some voters aren't able to mark their ballot by hand. They need a ballot marking device. Do you know what that is? Have you ever seen one of those?
For disabled voters?
Yeah, they prefer the term voters with disabilities, for voters with disabilities. It's where, say, somebody has a very shaky hand and they can't mark that ballot themselves,
right.
Or perhaps they're blind. Then they can use a device. Sometimes they use like a puff and sip, or sometimes they use like a go stick that's similar like to a video game, and they get that machine to mark the ballot for them. But previously, the ballot marking device was a separate device. Either it was on a separate side of the machine or it was a separate machine altogether. That machine would print out the ballot for that voter with the disability, and then the voter with the disability takes that ballot and over to the scanner and scans the ballot like all the other ballots. But now the new systems that are being advertised and that are being introduced here in New York, they're called hybrid voting machines, and they combine a printer and a scanner in one. And because of that, after you scan your ballot into the machine, the ballot passes under the printer head again. And if, say, you voted for president, but you didn't vote for Senate, if there's malware on the machine, it could sense that there's no vote there for Senate, and it could add an extra vote that you didn't put on your ballot and onto the ballot itself. So this is one reason that these machines are very dangerous, is because they can compromise that paper ballot, which is the one thing that we have, that we treasure, to be able to check that the machines are counting accurately. And we don't want these machines certified in New York.
I have a question for you. If there's so many problems, how come it hasn't really gotten much more attention? I get a lot of emails from Allegra Dengler, a former village trustee in Dobbs Ferry, and she's been passionate about this for many years. But why hasn't this issue caught more attention from Albany lawmakers and the governor and the mainstream media?
It's a really good question, Paul. I really do appreciate Allegra. She was the one actually who notified me about this issue. She had read a security post by a Princeton professor, Andrew Appel, where he identified this problem. There's a few other people in the election security community. Philip Stark and Jenny Cohn were two people who had identified it. And Allegra alerted me, and then I alerted another security specialist who did another report on it. So we slowly in the election security community became aware of it. I don't know what to tell you, except that it's a little bit complicated, a little bit hard to understand maybe, and in general our media wants for things that are kind of easy to understand, like 1, 2, 3. And I will also say that there is a real hesitancy to undermine people's confidence in our election process. And I empathize with that. I understand there's a worry that if we tell people, well, there's a chance your vote won't be counted, that people won't come out and vote. But actually, I think the opposite is true. And I believe there was a study that reinforced this, that when people are told about these problems, there's more of a feeling of transparency, and they have more confidence that the problems are going to be addressed, and it actually encourages participation. So I think it's really, I respect people's intelligence more than that. I think that people need to know what's going on so that they can make smart decisions. And our group is called Smart Elections. We are a new nonpartisan organization, and we're dedicated to alerting people about election reform and bringing a broad-based coalition together, bringing voting rights groups and disability groups and anti-corruption groups and election security groups together for a larger election reform movement. Our elections really are in disrepair, and we need a broad-based election reform movement.
Right, we have to take a break, and then I want to focus a little bit on what people could do if they're outraged and they want to get involved. So we'll take a break, and we'll be right back. My guest is Lulu Friesdat, and co-host is Danielle Jacoby. Thank you.
WVOX. Now back to the Greenberg Report on 1460 WVOX. Once again, here's Greenberg Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
I'm Paul Feiner, Greenberg Town Supervisor, and my co-host is Danielle Jacoby, and we're interviewing Lulu Friesdat, and we're talking about election security. Danielle, do you have any other questions?
Yeah, so you mentioned a new bill in New York, which would be an optical scan ballot, where there's a potential for the written vote to be changed from what it was. Is this relatively exclusive to New York, or is this something that could also be found or suggested in other states throughout the country?
So let me just clarify. It's not that there's a bill. What happens in New York in terms of our getting new voting equipment is that the machines get certified by the New York State Board of Elections. That's 4 men who are unelected. They're appointed, and they have public meetings, usually once a month, and they either determine to certify or not certify voting equipment. So these hybrid machines, there's 3 of them that are considered particularly risky, and they are, in fact, they are being sold all over the country. They are already in use in 6 swing states, including Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Virginia. And what happened, there's 2 models that are potentially going to be used here in New York. One of them, called the Dominion Ice, was already certified in October by the New York State Board of Elections. We want that machine decertified. It got an additional security report that determined that there was a high risk that this type of attack could happen. And then the report gave some what they called mitigations, things that could be done to stop it, but they were things that really are ridiculous, like putting a foam block inside the voting machine or taking the printer cartridge out. So we don't think that's going to be done, and so we think that machine needs to be decertified. Then there's a second machine. This voting machine is by ES&S, and it's called the Express Vote XL. It's a touchscreen machine that counts votes with barcodes. If you look at a barcode, do you know if that barcode is for Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren or, Inslee? You don't. It's a barcode. Barcodes can be easily hacked, and barcode readers can be hacked. So here in New York, we do not want to be voting with barcodes, and we don't want to be voting on touchscreen machines. We've never allowed touchscreen voting machines to come into New York State. And so that is why on June 6th, our organization is sponsoring an action at the New York State Board of Elections where this is going to be determined, and we invite people, we implore people, we beg people, we encourage people to come out and join us. Take a stand. Your vote matters. Your vote and how it is counted matters, and this is the time to stand up and make sure that it will be counted as you cast it. We are going to be in Albany at 40 North Pearl Street at the New York State Board of Elections at 11 a.m. on June 6th to say personally to the Board of Election Commissioners, we do not want the Express Vote XL certified in New York. And I encourage all of your listeners to come and join us. And they can go to our website. It's smartelections.us. They can sign up to participate in the action. They can also watch a 5-minute investigation. It's part 1 of a 3-part series that we're producing to alert people to this. So, although you may not be getting your information from the mainstream media, if you go to our website, you can watch an extremely well-produced 5-minute investigation about this. I'm a longstanding mainstream journalist. I've worked at all of the main networks at ABC, CBS, NBC, and I produced this piece. It's a very honest and direct investigation about this problem that you can watch at smartelections.us.
So if people want to get involved, they just go to your website.
Absolutely. They sign up. And if you cannot come on that day, I encourage you to come. If you can't come, please support us in other ways. We do need money. It's actually very expensive to hold an action like this. We're bringing in security people and activists from across the country. We're trying to provide transportation. We're doing really great T-shirts that say hand-marked paper ballots. So please do support us financially with as large a donation as possible. It's there on our website, smartelections.us. You can follow me on Twitter at Lulu Friesdat. It's LULUFRIESDAT. And Paul, I hope you and Danielle are going to be there with us in person to let the commissioners know, we want our votes to count.
Are you getting much support from Albany lawmakers?
We're getting some interest, yeah. We met with Zellner Myri's chief of staff last week and explained the problem to her, and she really seemed to get it and understand that this was an issue. We are also putting forward some other legislative solutions, and Danielle, these would be bills. So, for example, we're proposing a bill that after a voter casts the ballot, it would be prevented from ever going under a printer head.
Right.
That's something that should just never happen. So that's a bill that we're proposing. We also want to change the procurement process. One of the things that's happening right now is that the vendors are the ones who get to choose what equipment is coming into our state. And they are always picking the most expensive equipment, and sometimes it's the worst equipment. And we think that the process needs to be reversed. The New York State commissioners need to be able to say, well, this is the equipment we want, and to request it. And then there's also some misunderstandings, like about the full-face ballot. New York has said for years that we have to have a full-face ballot, but there was a study by the Brennan Report that actually said that's a misinterpretation. That's not what the original law actually said. And if we could go back and look at the actual understanding to be clear that we don't actually require a full-face ballot, it would give us a lot more flexibility in what machines we could use. And one thing I do want to say, it's very, very important for voters with disabilities to have a private, independent, and comfortable experience. Voters with disabilities have not had a good experience with these two machines, the Dominion Ice and the Express Vote XL. They don't like them. They say that they're cumbersome to use. And this is another real problem, is that all the voters are going to vote on one machine instead of voters with disabilities having a separate machine. And so there's going to be much longer lines because you're going to have to wait for each person, like a voter with a disability, to have their session, which might take 15 or 20 minutes, and then that line can back up. And so
is there a possibility of a lawsuit on that with the ADA?
It's a little bit complicated. We are working very closely with members of the disability community, and they're really in a hard spot. And my heart goes out to members of the disability community because these are the only two machines that are being offered right now as new options, and yet they're very dissatisfied with them. So they're kind of between a rock and a hard place, and they're not quite sure what to do. But that's one reason why changing the full-face ballot would give us some other options on what kind of machines voters with disabilities could be using. And we really need to support our voters with disabilities. They are often having a very hard time at the polls. So even though, for example, the ADA law says that every polling place has to have a voting machine for voters with disabilities, often the machine might not be turned on. It might not be set up. If it is turned on, the poll workers may not be trained in it, and voters with disabilities may actually be discouraged from using it for those reasons. And so they are not feeling the support, and they are not getting the resources that they need to have a comfortable experience. And all voters, we need to support voters with disabilities. Any of us could become a voter with a disability at any time. And so it's very, very important that we support that community and make sure that their needs are met.
We only have less than a minute left, so could you give us the website again?
Yes, of course. It's smartelections.us, and I really hope that people will come out and join us. Mark that in your calendar, June 6th, 11 a.m. We're going to be at, I think it's 40 Water Street, 40 North Pearl Street, Albany, New York. And please join us there.
And another action step people could take is writing letters to state lawmakers, to the governor's office.
Such a great suggestion, Paul. Write to the governor. The governor is the person who appoints the commissioners. Reach out to the governor, send him a letter saying that he needs to step in and let people know that, and let the commissioners know we don't want to vote on the Express Vote XL or the Dominion Ice. Let the governor know to say no to those voting machines, and we will have a letter writing campaign up soon.
Or even contact your state legislators, because if they reach out to the governor, it may carry a lot of weight. I'm Paul Feiner, our Greenburgh Town Supervisor, and I'll speak to everybody next week. And my co-host is Danielle Jacoby. And thank you, Danielle, for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Good. I'll see everybody next week.